Okay, so you're thinking about buying a house for the first time, and it's one of the most expensive things you'll ever do. Okay, so buying a house, getting married, having a child, all these things are expensive, and it's really important when you're a first-time buyer that you look at your medium to long-term plans and your direction of travel, because sometimes when I meet first-time buyers, they're being far too cautious in their approach, and they're buying a property, or they're thinking they want to buy a property that will see them through the next couple of years. And to be honest, you can often tell that they're still thinking like tenants when I see people for the first time. So you need to think about where do you want to be, and that'll just depend on your life circumstances. So are you partnered or married? Are you thinking about having kids? Do you have kids already? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you need to be looking at schools and catchment areas. And just a word on that, that in certain parts of the northeast of England that I obviously know really well, there's certain new build housing estates that you would think are in the catchment area for the schools in the nearest town, when actually that's not the case. So please do your research if you're thinking about school places for children or future children as well. And if you've got a growing family, or again if you plan to have a family, it's really important that you, in my experience anyway, that you buy the house now that you don't yet need. So if you've got a couple of kids and let's say they're 5 and 3 years old, what you'll know already, and you won't need me to tell you, is that they're going to be teenagers before you know it. And when they're teenagers, is the living space going to work for you? Because what would be a real shame is if you're a first-time buyer and you bought a property and you thought that that was going to be suitable, but then 3, 4, 5 years later it started to feel a little bit small. Okay, so be really careful when you're thinking about new build houses, because often on new build estates there's not much that you can do to expand the living space. So if you're going to buy a new build, think about what your circumstances are probably going to be like in 3, 5, 10 years time if you can, allowing for the fact that nobody knows for sure what's going to happen, but you've got to really try and see into the future. I think new builds are great for some folks, especially if they come with a 10-year builder's NHBC guarantee or something similar. For others, they can be an absolute disaster. And what I mean by that is if you're buying a new build estate and houses are continuing to be built on that estate for several years afterwards, then it can often take quite a long time for the value of your house to stabilise and even grow in value at some point in the future. And that's because if I want to buy a house on your estate, why would I buy your house, which is now second hand, when I can get a brand new one from just 500 yards down the road, which hasn't been lived in yet, where I can pick the kitchen, I can pick the bathroom, etc, etc, etc. So I'll just be careful, not saying don't buy new build houses if you're a first time buyer, but just be aware that in most scenarios it takes, in my experience, 5 to 10 years for those prices to really stabilise until an estate's fully finished. For the more adventurous out there, you might want to buy a property that has the opportunity to be improved. So it might be a 3-bed semi where you could extend over the garage. It could be something where you could do a loft conversion. It could be something that's really tired that just needs a bit of TLC, a lick of paint, a new kitchen, etc. I often think as a first-time buyer, if you can buy something and add value to that property, that plot, and increase the equity that you have in that property, then that's a good idea as well. So you've got to think like that, because in the UK, well, especially in the northeast of England, it's not normal for first-time buyers to have huge deposits. You might only have saved a 5 or 10% deposit, and therefore if you can try and buy a property with a little bit of TLC and DIY, you can add some value to it. So that it increases your equity. The benefit to you as a mortgage customer is the bank will base the interest rate that they charge to you on the value of the property against the balance of the mortgage. So if you're borrowing 95% of a property's value, you're going to pay a higher rate of interest than if you're borrowing 85% of the property's value. So it stands to reason that it's worthwhile considering that, depending on your circumstances. Stamp duty for first-time buyers up to £300,000 as a purchase price was abolished a few years ago by the Chancellor. So when you're a first-time buyer, you've got to think about your deposit, 5-10% or more ideally, depending on how much you've got. You've got to think about your legal costs. For a purchase, that might be £1,000, £1,200. That will be dictated by whether or not the property is freehold or leasehold. I always prefer my clients to buy freehold property because you own the property itself, the house, and the land it's built on, whereas if you buy a flat, that's often leasehold. and if it's in a block of flats, it usually comes with a monthly service and management fee, and that can be anywhere from £50 a month to £200 a month, depending on the type and style of property and the location. And that can often make it more expensive to live there, obviously, but it can also make it more difficult to sell in the future, depending on how many years are left on the lease itself. So a lot of mortgage lenders want to see the term of the lease on a leasehold property to be in excess of 85 years. There's some that will let you go down to 55, 60 years, but you've got more choice when the lease is longer. That being said, I would personally be very cautious of buying a leasehold property, and I would take advice from your financial advisor here at Giraffe, and also your solicitor before you potentially pay out any fees and get underway with a leasehold transaction. My final point on that is that although we do expect the government to bring some reform into play over the coming years, at this moment in time, if you ask a freeholder if you can extend the lease term on your property, then I'm seeing clients quoted anywhere at the moment from £2,000 to £3,000 up to £15,000, £16,000. And unless you've got very deep pockets, that's a very expensive bill to cover. Last couple of things as first time buyers, you've really got to think about the length of time you tie in for on your mortgage. So most first time buyers should take a fixed rate of 2, 3, 5, 10 years. What you do will depend on your circumstances. With a fixed rate, you have the benefit of knowing what your payments are going to be for the fixed rate duration, which is fantastic. But remember, if you're tied in for say 3 to 5 years on a fixed rate, that you will not be able to sell that house and pay off the mortgage in full without incurring an early repayment charge. That being said, that if you move house during the fixed rate period, 99.9% of the mortgages now that we would ever arrange are portable. So what that means is if you pass a credit check again and you pass the affordability checks again, then you will be able to take your current mortgage to your next property. But going back to my first point, really you want to try and buy a property that you're going to grow into and that you can add value to over the years as we move on, because every time you move house you have to pay estate agents fees, legal fees again, stamp duty the next time around. You know, it can cost £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 just to move house in the future. So if you can jump up an extra rung or two up the ladder as a first time buyer, that's often the best thing to do, in my experience anyway. Other factors to consider is the type of survey that you might take out. So you'll have the choice between a basic valuation, which is often free of charge or very, very cheap through the bank or building society that you take the mortgage through. The surveyor there will literally spend 5 minutes in the property at most, and it won't be worth the paper it's written on, really, for you, in my opinion. You can upgrade to a home buyer's report, which is a little bit more expensive. It could be £250 to £500 depending on the lender. And for a home buyer's report, the surveyor spends about 45 minutes to an hour in the property, and you would typically get a 5 to 8 page report on the condition of the house. Or you can go one step further than that again and go for a full building survey. It's definitely worthwhile considering on older style properties that you can see or you get a sense might have something wrong with them, because the surveyor will spend, you know, a good half a day to a full day in a property, and you'll typically get an 18 to 24 page report on the condition of the house. And if it does flag up any issues in the property, A, that's money well spent because you're going into that transaction with your eyes open, but B, if, I don't know, there's £5,000 worth of work needs doing to the property, that survey that you've paid for then becomes a tool and a mechanism to help you renegotiate the price with the owner through the estate agent. One word on estate agents: they're acting for the seller, not the buyer. Estate agents want to know that you're financially approved. So one thing that we would always want you to do with us when we're giving you advice is enable us to get you an agreement in principle, which doesn't cost or commit you anything to get you an agreement in principle, but it just gives you a bit of paper or a PDF which just says to the estate agent that we are financially approved and subject to survey and all the legal checks that the solicitor would do for you, that you can complete on that purchase. And what you'll usually find is when the estate agent knows that you've been financially vetted and you're good to go, they know that you're very much worth spending time with, and they're going to show you as many properties as they have on their books. And they might even tell you about properties that aren't coming on right now but are coming on next week or the week after, and that can give you a real advantage when viewing properties, because estate agents often know what's around the corner that might not be publicly aware straight away. So there's lots more to say, but hope that gives you a good overview. Please get in touch with us at Giraffe HQ and we'd be delighted to discuss your requirements.